Imagine being only 5 years old and being dragged by a reptilian creature into the interior of an unknown craft. Hilary Porter lived through this nightmare, a cut from her neck down to her feet, a fainting spell, and no apparent scar. Could it all be a delusion, or is there something more? Who or what really took her? Hilary Porter was born in the mid-1940s in a country house in Wales. This region is known for its bucolic landscapes, where wide lawns stretch out to the horizon and gentle hills outline the small villages. Hilary's family lived in relative tranquility, surrounded by generous nature marked by crystal-clear streams, ancient trees, and especially vast fields of tall grass. For most children of that time, this setting was like an open-air playground. However, for Hilary, it would become the stage for experiences as surreal as they were terrifying. She recounts that her first memory of abduction occurred when she was just 5 years old, around 1950. While she was running carelessly through the dense vegetation, she bumped into a reptilian-looking creature with scaly skin, about 5 feet tall, and a physique that appeared extraordinarily strong. The sight of that being paralyzed her to such an extent that she barely had time to react. In a matter of seconds, she was firmly grabbed by the arms and dragged toward a metallic flying object, shaped like a disc, which rested silently a few yards away. She says she noticed some kind of door or ramp open, revealing the inside of the craft. According to her recollections, there was a rudimentary elevator or platform that took her to a larger compartment, filled with blinking electronic panels, colored buttons, and devices whose purpose was completely unknown to a mere 5-year-old child. Hilary's young mind registered little more than the sensation of a paralyzing fear and the image of several small creatures with black eyes and thin bodies walking from one side to the other as though carrying out specific tasks. She described these beings as having gray skin, a head disproportionately large compared to their bodies, and big almond-shaped eyes. At a certain point, she recounts being placed on a stretcher, undressed, and subjected to a cut running from her feet to her neck, causing indescribable pain. Amid screams and pleas, she fainted. When she came to, she was lying once again in the field behind her house, the same spot where she had encountered the reptilian being. Curiously, there was no sign of that supposed cut. Even so, she felt dazed, with a pounding headache and a sense of mental confusion. She ran to tell her mother what had happened, expecting shock or disbelief. However, her mother received her with an odd composure, even saying that perhaps it wasn't the first time Hilary had disappeared without explanation. The woman confided that ever since Hilary was 2 years old, she would occasionally vanish from the family property and be found miles away in a state of shock, unable to explain how she got there. This seemingly calm attitude on her mother's part supported Hilary in understanding, even at such a young age, that something truly unusual was occurring. Over the years, Hilary began to show purplish marks on her body, inexplicable, superficial cuts, and on certain occasions, she would wake up to find blood on her sheets, especially near her head. She also suffered from frequent migraines and nausea, in addition to feeling body aches, particularly in the days following periods of temporary amnesia. As Hilary grew older and reached adolescence, it became increasingly difficult to share her experiences without being met with skepticism or ridicule. Like anyone who goes through out-of-the-ordinary situations, she feared mockery. Nevertheless, she continued her studies and, after finishing school, earned a degree in engineering, demonstrating an aptitude for understanding complex systems and technical details. Hilary's skills led her to work in companies associated with the defense and technology sectors, including a company called Marconi Space and Defense Systems, a subsidiary of the General Electric Company, GEC, a British conglomerate responsible for developing communications and military equipment. For the UK government, Such a position was considered trustworthy, since it involved access to confidential data and projects of significant military relevance, highlighting her high level of education and reliability. In 1970, now married, Hillary describes an even more intriguing episode. She and her husband were driving home after another day of work. It was a routine trip, something they did every day. At a certain point, they realized they had blinked, and suddenly the car was parked in the garage. At home, without either of them recalling having driven the remainder of the journey. The sensation was that of a sudden temporal jump. The clock didn't seem to have advanced as much as it should have. The odometer reading showed the vehicle had not traveled the distance required to cover the route from work to home. Both, confused, exchanged glances and tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe they were extremely tired, or perhaps the route was so automatic that they hadn't consciously registered it. However, there was something more. Upon entering the bathroom, Hillary noticed on her stomach a triangular mark, resembling a bruise, or put another way, the result of suction. Following that event, she started to feel she was constantly being watched. A discomforting suspicion that someone or something was following her, observing her, and monitoring her movements as though there were invisible eyes on her. The sense of being followed intensified, and Hillary began paying attention to any suspicious detail in her daily life. Moreover, other experiences followed, including the appearance of mysterious blue lights, floating orbs, in places related to her work. In 1974, for instance, she claims that while she was in a Defense Department laboratory, she witnessed 2 luminous orbs passing in front of the building. Although these orbs did not abduct her at that moment, a night security guard on site experienced something far more traumatic that same night. Accompanied by his German shepherd, the man saw a strange light emanating from a restricted area of the building where, theoretically, no one should be at that hour. Driven by his duty as a guard, he approached, opened the door, and came face to face with a being that had large eyes, grey skin, and a helmet emitting light, a grey, according to the popular description in ufology. According to the guard's account, the entity was rummaging through the filing cabinet as if searching for something specific. Confronted by such a bizarre scene, the man panicked, let the dog go, and was admitted to a government-run psychiatric facility. Based on the sources Hillary consulted, that guard was never seen again. From these episodes, Hillary began to suspect that more than one race of extraterrestrial beings was interested in Earth. She points out contact with beings called Nordics, described as having pale skin, great height, fair hair, and features very similar to humans, except for their sturdier build and almost perfect appearance. She also mentions reptilians, which are creatures with scaly skin and an intimidating gaze, and the greys, short, thin, with large heads and slanted black eyes. In Hillary's view, greys act like a sort of working class, field operators serving higher races, among them the Nordics and reptilians themselves. Over the years, unexplained physical signs continued to appear on her body, such as scratches, superficial cuts, bruises, and occasionally viscous substances she couldn't identify. At the same time, she documented lapses in memory, periods in which she lost hours or even days, unable to recall what had happened. Upon waking in the morning, she would find blood on her pillow or experience unexplained bleeding from her nose and ears. As these experiences increased, she began to have flashbacks that, according to her, revealed surgical environments inside crafts or laboratories. One event Hillary considers highly impactful occurred soon after she gave birth to her daughter, nicknamed Cell. Because of complications during childbirth and the effects of anesthesia, she remained unconscious for about 17 hours. When she finally came to, still somewhat groggy, she got up to go to the bathroom, dragging herself with difficulty due to weakness and pain. However, upon opening the bathroom door, she says she encountered a completely different setting. Instead of the white walls and typical tiles of a hospital bathroom, she saw a room bathed in greenish light, with cables and wires stretched along the walls and shelves full of glass jars. Inside these jars, she saw what appeared to be hybrid fetuses, creatures that resembled a combination of human traits, but with overly large eyes, thin arms, grayish skin, and feet without toes. Some bore a red mark right in the middle of the chest. The shock of the scene made her want to run, but when she looked back, she noticed that the door through which she had entered had disappeared. Suddenly, an intense light filled everything and she passed out. Minutes later, she awoke back in her hospital bed, the same one as before, and realized that only a few minutes had passed on the clock, even though to her it felt as though she had spent at least an hour in that sinister laboratory. Such accounts, of course, are highly controversial. Hillary herself acknowledges over time that many people label her as delusional or a victim of hallucinations. However, she claims to have circumstantial evidence that supports her testimonies. Chief among these are detailed drawings of parts of the crafts, of the beings, and of the instruments she saw, all made by her, given she has a technical background in engineering drawing. She also says she has an implant near her left ear, detectable by touch, although no medical exams have been publicly shared or officially confirmed to prove its existence. What intrigues her most is the emphasis these supposed aliens seem to give to her specific genetics. According to Hillary, descendants of Celtic tribes, Welsh, Scots, and Irish are especially sought out by these extraterrestrial races because they supposedly possess DNA of interest for experiments, especially for creating hybrids, given that there might be greater genetic compatibility or energetic predisposition for such events. This theory about Celtic lineages is not exclusive to Hillary. In the ufological community, there are various lines of speculation suggesting that certain families are abducted over generations, which would explain accounts from grandparents, parents, and children who, at different times, went through similar abduction and alien contact situations. In Hillary's case, her mother validated much of her experiences when she was still very young, indicating a deeper history, possibly inherited from previous generations. This encouraged her to begin speaking openly about the subject, initially in small groups of ufologists and later at lectures and conferences dedicated to extraterrestrial phenomena. After her first marriage, Hillary ended up getting divorced. Later, she met Ken, her new partner, who not only believed her story, but also joined her in investigating similar cases. Together, they founded BEAMS, the British Earth and Aerial Mysteries Society. The organization is committed to examining anomalous events, including abductions and UFO sightings. It also provides emotional and informational support to people who claim to have gone through comparable experiences, so that they don't feel isolated or ridiculed. The idea is to offer a safe space to share their stories and even collect evidence that might in some way substantiate their testimonies. As public interest in UFOs grew in the media, especially after decades of debate on the Roswell incident, the phenomenon of crop circles in England, and iconic cases such as Betty and Barney Hill in the United States, the subject ceased to be a total taboo and began attracting curious onlookers, enthusiasts, and researchers from the most diverse fields. In the 1990s, Hillary decided to make her story even more public. She attended ufology events, took part in documentaries, and gave interviews to local newspapers. At that time, she revealed another astonishing story. One night in the spring of 1980, after putting her daughter to bed, she had left the bedroom and gone to the living room. Suddenly, she saw on the other side of the window a humanoid figure clad in a black suit that covered its entire body, including gloves and a helmet built into the outfit. Frightened, her first instinct was to think it was a burglar. But as soon as the entity moved its hand in a gesture of greeting, Hillary felt her own arm move involuntarily, as though she had been telepathically compelled to mimic him. From that moment on, the figure moved with impossible speed, almost as if gliding through the air, until reaching the garden wall, lit by a thin ray of setting sun. Hillary managed to notice that the suit's fabric reflected light in an unusual way, shining in metallic shades unlike anything she had seen in human clothing. Before she could approach the window, the figure vanished before her eyes. During that same period, she repeatedly spoke of hieroglyphs and symbols she claimed to have seen inside the supposed crafts, sinuous lines, perfect geometric figures, and strange characters that she tried to reproduce in drawings. According to her descriptions, there was something highly advanced and minimalist about that technology, from the tall seats made of a lightweight material to the lack of visible screws or rivets, as though each piece of the craft's interior were molded into a single structure. Such descriptions echo many other abduction narratives worldwide, in which witnesses describe an environment that is almost aseptic and completely designed. Regarding the reasons these beings might be conducting experiments on humans, Hillary speculates that there are different purposes depending on the alien race involved. In the case of reptilians, she believes it has something to do with pure and simple genetic manipulation aimed at creating hybrid lineages for unknown ends. The Nordics, in her view, seem to have a more scientific or spiritual interest in humanity, while the Greys, according to numerous ufologists, do the fieldwork, collecting samples and performing exams. One memory she shares is of a being about 6 feet tall, wearing a green suit and something like claws on its hands. He was holding a square device supposedly capable of causing earthquakes. She claims to have received this information telepathically, and that such technology manipulated seismic aspects of the planet, potentially provoking tremors. To skeptics, this story sounds entirely fanciful, or at least impossible to prove. Even so, she tells it with conviction, emphasizing that these alien races can manipulate matter at the molecular level, pass through walls, create temporary portals, and capture people even if they are locked in their rooms. Concerning the supposed hierarchy among these beings, Hillary is firm in stating that the Greys are nothing more than employees or workers in a grand cosmic mechanism. They would perform specific tasks, gathering genetic material and reporting everything to the Reptilians and Nordics, who are in charge of planning operations. They would therefore be key pieces in the mass abduction scheme that, in her view, takes place all over the world. Further backing her claims, she mentions that in various countries, particularly in the UK, the US, and some areas of South America, there are similar accounts of dark-skinned, large-headed, black-eyed beings who act as a sort of first contact in most alien abductions. As Hillary aged, the abductions are said to have become less frequent. She theorizes that these beings no longer had the same interest in her body, possibly due to fertility-related issues, or simply because they had already collected all the genetic information they needed. Her dedication to the topic, however, has not diminished. On the contrary, she has become an active lecturer, taking part in regional, national, and international events, and frequently invited to share her life story and extraordinary experiences. She often speaks to divided audiences. Some believe every word without question, treating her as some kind of authority in ufology, while others cannot stifle their skepticism and attribute everything to sleep disorders, episodes of sleepwalking, or even psychiatric conditions. In interviews, Hillary often points out that the aim of her talks is not to immediately convince anyone, but rather to open up a space for dialogue, allowing people to reflect on the boundaries of what we recognize as real and possible. She stresses that the experiments left marks on her body, her mind, and her soul, She describes herself as a survivor of a hidden, complex phenomenon that government authorities prefer to ignore or conceal. It's not uncommon for her to mention that she worked on UK defence projects and heard first-hand accounts from military personnel, engineers, and employees who also experienced unexplainable encounters, but who would never disclose such stories publicly for fear of losing their jobs or credibility. Hillary's hypothesis about the Celtic tribes bolsters her belief that the Welsh, Scots, and Irish represent in some way what these beings are searching for, not just genetically, but also due to an ancestry filled with myths and legends about fairies, elves, and other supernatural beings, which may be, according to her view, ancient interpretations of encounters with extraterrestrials. This is why she believes certain places in the world serve as magnets for sightings and abductions. In the UK, there are accounts centered on Stonehenge in the English countryside, as well as Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, all regions with extraordinarily rich folklore. In her estimation, these myths are reflections of alien visits in remote times. In one of her books, Hillary narrates in detail the supposed regression hypnosis sessions she underwent to try to recover repressed abduction memories. She describes sensations of claustrophobia, extreme fear, and the perception of being treated like a guinea pig by beings devoid of empathy. The green, yellow, or red lights she saw inside the crafts, she says, seemed to denote different functions or rooms. In some of these memory flashes, she saw metal tables and chains restraining other people, possibly also abducted. She mentions hearing screams and groans, but is unsure whether these were real or some type of mental manipulation. Some argue that Hillary's entire narrative fits into a profile of sleep paralysis, compounded by childhood trauma and a vivid imagination. Fueled by sci-fi films and books, she counters by saying she experienced concrete evidence, such as bodily marks, implants, and above all, the relative coherence she sees in her flashbacks, which tie in with the time gaps she used to have throughout her life. In her circle of supporters, there are researchers who deem it inconceivable that an engineering professional associated with one of the largest defense companies in the UK could invent such an elaborate story without any basis. On the other hand, skeptics insist that professional credentials don't make anyone immune to memory errors or psychological disorders. Today, at 79 years old, Hillary Porter continues to give interviews, albeit less frequently, and remains ever willing to openly discuss her story, even encouraging people who have gone through similar experiences to seek help. She maintains that since she was 50, the abduction episodes have become increasingly sporadic, nearly ceasing altogether. However, she attributes that less to chance and more to the idea that the aliens no longer needed her for their experiments. In her words, "I was useful as long as they could use me." For those looking for alternative explanations, Hillary prefers to keep a respectful tone. She recognizes that without photographic evidence or official medical reports, her experiences can seem fanciful. Even so, she points out that the abduction phenomenon is not limited to her. There are hundreds of people around the world who recount similar stories of lost time, bodily marks, disturbing flashbacks, and even images of laboratories, hybrid fetuses, and telepathic beings. When questioned about why so many governments deny the existence of such phenomena, she refers to what she calls a silent agreement, a sort of collusion between official authorities and certain alien races, whose goal is to keep the public in the dark until their obscure aims are fulfilled. Hillary Porter's story spans multiple layers. It is a narrative that mixes the childhood horror of seeing an unknown being running toward her, the bafflement of an engineering professional faced with inexplicable time lapses, and the steadfast determination of a woman who, over the decades, has sought answers everywhere possible, be it religion, science, or ufology itself. Many ufologists view her as a symbolic figure in British field research, a witness who dares to speak on topics most people never even consider might be real. Others see her as an interesting psychoanalytic case, since her reports lie at the boundary between hallucination and real-life experience, brimming with highly symbolic images, beings that can cause earthquakes, laboratories full of hybrid fetuses, portals opening in a hospital bathroom. For the general public, who watch her interviews on TV, read her accounts in specialized magazines, and follow stories on the internet, Hillary's story is at the very least fascinating. Whether seen as crazy, visionary, or simply sincere, there's no denying that she presents a coherent narrative, brimming with details that, to her, lend substance to what she describes. That coherence is what keeps some researchers from dismissing her out of hand. Ultimately, the case of Hillary Porter brings us back to the eternal question: are we alone in the universe? And if we aren't, above all, what might be the true purpose of other cosmic intelligences visiting, examining, and interacting with humanity? For Hillary, the answer is clear. They've been among us for a long time. She describes them as beings that can walk about undetected when they choose and make themselves visible when they wish, either to select people with certain genetic traits or to gather critical information about our ways of life. Her experiences point to a universe far more complex than most could imagine. Psychology, religion, and science intersect and collide in her accounts, placing her in a position where one cannot help but wonder whether, on some level, part of the world's population might be going through similar phenomena but lack the courage or means to bring them to light. In the end, Hillary Porter says she has never regretted making her experiences public, even though she has faced ridicule, mockery, and disbelief. She believes that by sharing her story, she helps others understand what may be happening to them. Her work with beams, investigating abduction cases, and offering support to alleged victims represents a significant step toward addressing the topic with a certain degree of seriousness for those who are genuinely interested in the UFO phenomenon. In her closing remarks, she often reiterates, "My testimony isn't meant to scare anyone, but rather to let everyone know that if you ever go through something like this, you're not alone." Whatever the truth behind Hillary's alleged abductions may be, her legacy is established. She has become an emblematic figure on the British ufology scene, in particular because she has had access to relevant governmental and scientific circles. In her old age, she maintains the conviction that there's much that lies beyond our earthly comprehension. Whether her claims stem from actual memories or from subconscious creations, only time or an indisputable set of evidence can shed light on the matter. Until then, her life and her story continue to fuel heated debates and intrigue generations of the curious and the investigative. And as she often says, it takes courage to see what's beyond the veil of reality. In this way, Hillary Porter's path gathers all the elements of a narrative rich in layers. A childhood marked by unexplained events, a youth immersed in scientific studies and high-responsibility jobs, adulthood laden with mysteries and unrelenting quests for answers, and finally an old age full of accounts, lessons, and warnings for those wishing to explore the world of ufology. Perhaps her case will never be fully solved, but her story invites us to contemplate the vast unknown surrounding us, from the depths of our psyche to the farthest corners of the cosmos. Hence, the essential question remains, what is each person's role in this web of encounters and non-encounters with the supernatural? For Hillary, the answer lies in her blood, in her Celtic heritage, and in the unique genetics that made her a target of successive abductions, culminating in a personal epiphany that there's far more life out there than we could ever imagine. In the midst of so many uncertainties, the only certainty is that her account remains alive, stirring curiosity and, who knows, paving the way for a future in which humanity might better grasp its place among the stars.